Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming and welcome to the Place Scrutiny Committee. I'm going to kick straight off into the agenda. My name's Councillor Myers, Chair of the committee, and we've received apologies for absence from Councillor Callum Taylor, and everybody else is here. Next item is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Perrott.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a conflict of interest on item 6, so I won't take part in that item.
Okay, thank you. Minutes. Okay, bumper edition of minutes. Hope everyone's been reading. We made some edits to one set, so we brought them back again. And then last meeting's minutes are here as well. So can we have members' approval for the minutes of the 24th of March, please? Correct record? Seconded? Yeah, okay, nods all round. And then the second set. Last month's meeting, 19th of May. Can I have approval for those, please? Yeah, okay. That's all the minutes. Thank you very much. Right, we'll move on to public participation. And we have got 3 registered speakers this evening, all speaking in relation to item 5, the car parking charges review. There are 3 minutes each. I'm going to take public participants in the order that I've got them here on my sheet, which I'm presuming is probably the order that the council's received the requests in. That's right. So could I ask Ruth Phillips, please? You'll just have to pop the microphone on and then you've got 3 minutes.
Is that working? Sounds good. Yeah, hi, my name is Ruth Phillips, and I'm here today speaking on behalf of myself and traders on Bishopthorpe Road who have been campaigning for over a year against the 500% and subsequent 275% increase in car parking charges at our local community shoppers car park. We now need solutions. We've always said that we want to work with York Council to find ways to help reduce congestion, whilst also recognising that a number of York residents, particularly those with protected characteristics, rely on their cars to access their local shops. We will continue to advocate for affordable, accessible and proportionate car parking prices for local shopping parades outside of the city centre until an acceptable solution is found. We welcome the findings and recommendations of the Arrett report, as this provides an opportunity for the Council to reflect on their car parking policy and actively listen to over 1,000 York residents and bring about change. We've seen over the last year that increasing car parking charges by 500% or even 275% does not lead to a modal shift to more sustainable travel or a reduction in congestion. This has led to over 40 small independent businesses on Bishy Road as collateral damage. In our view, this is now an opportunity to listen to the views of residents and traders alongside the evidence from over the past year and support York residents to continue to access their local shops. Our own Bishopthorpe Road Traders report has a number of recommendations that are similar to that of the Arrett report. The main one that we feel needs considering imminently is that of a recommendation of introducing a low-cost first hour of parking in community parking locations. We also recommend explicitly aligning pricing with equality duties and accessibility objectives, ensuring parking income is transparently ring-fenced for transport purposes, commit to meaningful engagement and consultation with traders and the local community before any future changes, and work collaboratively with traders to increase sustainable travel to Bishopthorpe Road whilst recognising they are already exceeding national and local targets. We now look forward and not back, hoping that York Council make the right choice to listen to businesses and residents, as car parks and local parades need to be seen as a community resource and not as a source of income. I'd also just like to refer to the right to review guidance, which kind of, I thought there was a sentence in there which kind of sums up kind of where we're at really. We hope the end result should be to remove unnecessary or excessive parking restrictions and unfair parking practices to the benefit of the local economy and local shops. I guess our kind of hopes and outcomes for kind of going forward is very similar to that within the guidance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruth.
No worries.
Johnny Hayes? Right, it's good to see you, Johnny.
Nice to see you too.
You got 3 minutes. I think if the microphone looks like it's still on, so.
Yeah. Well, it's been quite a while. It's this review coming round. It seems to have gone on for a little while, but here we are. But I must confess to having looked forward to this evening, because I actually think that the Arup report, I feel, vindicates our decision to put in this right to challenge. That right to challenge is obviously there within the Transport Management Act, and when we first heard about the 500% increase, I must confess, I was incredibly shocked. It's now 14 months ago since I went into Pexton's Hardware on Bishopthorpe Road and spoke to Todd, who owns the shop, who's told me, have you heard the rumour? And I said, no, I don't think I have. What's the rumour? And he said, we understand that the car park's going to rise by 300%. And I said, no, that just cannot be true. And he said, well, we gather it is. And I said, well, that'll be over £3 an hour. That can't be true. So I rang up, rang the council, and I discovered it wasn't 300, but 500%. It was astonishing. And that astonishment spread throughout the area and spread to all of those people that went into that car park. They were shocked. They couldn't believe what had been put forward. Now, fortunately, some better decisions were made in the process following an 8,000 signature petition from the Bishopthorpe Road Traders Association. And it certainly needed to change, because not only was it a 500% increase, but the tariffs were going to be charged 24 hours a day, and it became a city centre car park and became a long stay car park as well. So all in all, we've gone from an 80 pence per hour community shoppers car park to a car park that was £5 at the weekend and £4.85 for every day during the week. Huge amount of money, absolutely ludicrous, we all felt. And that was echoed by those people who came along. Now, I'm here as a volunteer on Bishopthorpe Road, as a former shopkeeper and actually a former councillor, as a ward councillor for that area. And I've been working to carry out a survey of what people thought in our area. So not only have Arup produced their report, which I think the key line in that is their criticism of the 500% increase not being best practice. Well, very politely put, our survey, which I passed on to all of you, I hope that you've had a chance to read it, because I think it's an absolutely excellent survey, which is, I think, what the council should be doing. It needs to consult, it needs to find out what people think prior to making these decisions, because we received this without any proper consultation. It came completely out of the blue.
I'll have to push you, Johnny, for a
Right.
last 30 seconds.
Yeah, sure. I wrote to Councillor Myers and to the Vice Chair as well the other day to say, do we have, I understand there ought to be, a draft, a parking policy for the city, because the Arabs suggest that we have an annual review. However, my understanding is that a parking review or a parking policy document should have been produced for last November. I think it's utterly crucial that we take the recommendations of Arup, that we'd have a much better review of car parking. And to be frank, it desperately needs a coherent parking policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Johnny. Joe Nasson?
Thank you. The mic's still on.
Great.
Trying not to repeat what Ruth and Johnny have said, but just to kind of highlight some of the points of the survey that we carried out. My name's Joe Nasson, by the way. I'm one of the traders on Bishopthorpe Road. The impact on the increase had an average drop in people spending time on the street by about 37%. The effective drop in footfall was about 20%, and local transactions reduced between 13 and 20%. That had a significant drop of annual takings on the street, and that did affect me personally as well. And countering that, the council's income increased by 152%, whilst only reducing car parking numbers in the car park by 11%. So it sort of questions the success of imposing the car park changes increases. Now, I want to stress that I support the general sentiment of increasing charges to reduce congestion, and everyone in the BRTA takes that opinion. We think car park charges do need to increase to reduce congestion, but over a longer period of time, that doesn't create the shocks that we've seen on the street. And in the other three areas that have been part of this review. I think touching on what Johnny said about best practice, increasing those charges were deemed by Arup as not being best practice, and I appreciate in your report as well that you acknowledge that, and thank you for your pragmatic report. I was sort of really pleased to read that, and also the Arup report. But in terms of best practice and hoping that, and I get the irony that I'm asking for prices to come down and investment to go up, but I think taking it in the longer term, you will still get income from the car park, and over the longer term, consider prioritising accessible and affordable short stay car parking, as we've already said, but also to invest in quality high street quality or high quality public transport. And I appreciate that bus services have now started to improve, whether or not as a result of this process or something else, but that is the kind of thing that needs to improve and be shouted about. I think it's something that if you're going to do it, and I know it has been in the press to some degree, but that kind of thing needs to be promoted and advertised and really encouraging people to use it. Also, in terms of sort of more sustainable transport, to create safe and connected cycling infrastructure. And again, I know that's happening, but it needs to go hand in hand with increasing prices. If we're going to meaningfully change people's behaviours from out of the cars and into public transport or cycling or walking or whatever, that those options are there and that they're promoted and celebrated. And part of that is pedestrian safety, footpaths and places to sit for people who can't walk long distances.
And just the last 30 seconds.
Yeah, thank you. And other things like supporting car clubs and shared mobility, engaging communities in the decision making, really finding out what they need in individual areas. There'll never be a one size fits all. And then, finally addressing parking inequality, where, we on Bishopthorpe Road are sort of really struggling to compete with similar parades where parking is free. So, really like to think that those goals can be achieved over a longer, more sustainable period of time. And we'd really like to work alongside the council to help that happen, certainly from our perspective on Bishop Road. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Members, I've done this before, so I did just want to ask if there's anything that you'd like the Bishopthorpe Road Traders Association to clarify, or if you had any questions for them following their participation at the start of the meeting. If you did want to ask them something now, you can do that. Okay. Okay, we will move to the item itself. Okay. Which is item 5, car parking charges review.
I just want to check whether they're here.
Okay, Councillor Vassy.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just wanted to check that a representative from BID and a representative from Make It York had been invited, and that they've both been able to participate around the table. I think we agreed last time we'd welcome that. And I'm sure it would make a constructive discussion. So I just wanted an update, really, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Vassy. You'll have to leave it with me to check. I'm not sure about that. James, are you happy?
Just in the process of organising that, Councillor Vassy, for the next meeting. I think we talked about the July meeting for it.
Right, okay. I thought it had been for this meeting, but you're suggesting it'll be for another meeting.
That's what we were looking at, yeah, for the next July meeting. But
Okay.
I'll update you.
Thank you.
Thanks, James. Okay, so members, this is the car parking charges review. It's a pre-decision scrutiny item, and the report invites this committee to review the independent review of car parking charges produced by Arup. It's contained in full in your pack. Feedback from this committee will inform an executive decision later this year to consider whether the car parking charges in local community areas should be amended. So we've been joined at the table by a number of council officers and the executive member. Could I ask one of you to introduce the report? Yeah.
Thank
Claire.
you, Chair. Thank you, Chair, for inviting us today to present the independent review, as you've said, on car parking charging, looking at the 4 different areas in response to the 4 corresponding area petitions. Before we start, I would personally like to thank the petitioners, both traders and residents, for their patience, resilience and constructive challenge, and today gracious offer to continue to work with us. Right now, it is an incredibly difficult time for high streets across the country, and York and its urban shopping areas are not immune. People talk of the decline in the high street like it's inevitable, but talking of data misses the point. Behind every statistic showing a decline in footfall is a person who is no longer showing up in their local community, connecting with their friendly shops or local amenities. There are families who have less money in their pockets to spend or earn, and people generally considering their futures. The independent review run by Arup sets out these challenges for all to see. Arup have also suggested ways the council can balance the, at times, competing policies of reducing cars to encourage more reliable public transport with thriving local economies. These policies, however, are not mutually exclusive, and by listening to the petitioners in Annex C, Arup make many thought-provoking and insightful suggestions for the executive to consider at a later date. Today, though, is not about what next. Today is for us officers to hear from and learn from people who live and work within the city, both directly, as we just have, and in the annexes presented to you today, Annex C, C1, C2, C3 and C4, which cover Micklegate in number 1, Bishopthorpe Road in number 2, Heworth in number 3 and the Groves in number 4. Today's cover report sets out the background with petitions received in June and July last year from the 4 areas of, as just said, Bishopthorpe Road, Heworth, the Groves and Micklegate. In Annex A, we set out how the review and process has been compiled with the requirements set by MHCLG, although it's registered as DHCLG, and are due to respond to petitions. The review was conducted independently of the council at the request of the petitioners, who also requested this scrutiny tonight to ensure a fair, open and transparent review of the feedback. Annex B is a collation of petitioners' recommendations drawn from the independent review, whereas Annex C is ARUP's independent recommendations based on the policy context, their expertise, including from other areas, and the feedback they collated. These align in many ways with those written out in Annex B, with some differences. Annex C1 to C4 is each area's own independent review, which shows both similarities within the areas and also differences in these hyperlocal urban shopping districts that respond to residents within those very tight urban areas. Annex D presents the transaction and income data. There are also links in the report to the Council's published economic data, including the footfall data from October 2023, I'm going to say. Yeah. Or 24, sorry. Sorry, October 24. And the link to the York Bid's excellent economic data, which covers the city centre. The report includes the approved policy position for different sustainable transport options that have been implemented, with links to more information, and a table showing the data for those sustainable transport in paragraph 71. There is a section on the car parking charges themselves, which changed as a result of the traders' feedback. Wider economic considerations are included to show and reinforce the hugely challenging environment. And from page 16, there is a summary of feedback comparative to each of the different areas, whereas the annexes look at each area individually. Finally, today we are asking Scrutiny to review the feedback as set out in the annexes and recommendations as requested by the petitioners to help inform the next steps for executive consideration. I'd like to thank you again to the petitioners in the room and the others not here today for sharing their thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. Would anybody else like to speak to that? Gary?
Can I just add in context? This is over and beyond the requirements of the actual petition. The petition is this in line with policy? So, thank you very much to the traders and specifically individuals in this room in terms of the work we've developed initially with them in terms of the brief. But we have, in the context of wanting to set an investment strategy for these locations subject to funding as outlined in here and the conversations today, and the final report to executive gone beyond the initial petition requirements.
Thank you. Okay, I'm happy to open out to members for any comments and questions if you'd like to indicate, and I will make my way around the room. Councillor Whitcroft, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the public speakers. Thank you, officers and Councillor Avilius for this report. I think it's great that we've been able to respond in this way. I know that there was a lot of concern from local people about the car park price hikes. I think it's the first time I've seen this right to review come through in my 3 years as councillor, so it's a positive thing that we're doing here, and I'm really glad this scrutiny is taking place. As you can probably imagine, Chair, I've got a load of questions, and I could talk about parking until the cows can come home. But one of the things I want to specifically ask about is it sustainable and coherent for us to have different levels of parking charges across the city? Because I'm thinking about my ward here, which is essentially a mirror image of Micklegate Ward, over the river, Fishergate Ward. We've had the same car parking charge increases on St George's Fields. We've seen St George's Car Park, rather. We've seen that across areas in my ward with Fishergate shops, and other councillors will have similar stories across the city centre. How can we ensure that it's fair and sustainable for the whole city if we're going to have specific areas where there's going to be lower car parking charges than there would be for others?
I might want to come in. However, the specifics of this review is the areas outlined here. Whilst there isn't a specific policy as such, the policy in effect is the actual annual report, the finance report, and that in effect sets a two-tier approach in terms of the core of the city. So those localities that have an immediate city centre overlap. Obviously, we've got Res Park and other elemental parks beyond that in terms of neighbourhoods, but this isn't specifically, and this conversation isn't specifically around that wider, because we could go really deep into that, and as anywhere could in the UK, and you probably never get anywhere from experience as in, because places are so complicated and each individual has its own nuances, and even within these individual areas, as you can see in terms of the response levels and engagement we've had, each of these individual areas are very different in terms of how they operate, the businesses are in these locations, the population elements. So parking, except out of a city centre and the immediate zones of a city centre, in terms of that wider self, is better at a local level, which what we do in terms of Res Park going in terms of TTROs, the lanes team, transport teams and such like. So I know that's not a response, but I don't think anybody's going to be able to give, because there is always going to be a differential. Fundamentally, at this moment in time, we have a 2-zone parking system, roughly, which is about, there's a core of the city centre, and then there's intermediate, these areas that do influence the city centre. And if there wasn't a parking charge element, they would actually, because of the core of the centre is so high, they're probably inundated with parking. So part of that's actually about ensuring that they don't get inundated, they can be utilised locally. And secondly, the second element is about how do we drive our public transport corridors, and those are the denser areas. I don't know if Elaine, you want to add anything to that?
Well, in the way we look at charges, we often consider if it's, as Gary explained, a more local shopping car park, then we might use restrictions that are more time-based rather than charge, and that's also a way to adjust that.
Would you like to come back?
If that's all right, yeah. I'm very pleased I wasn't the first person to bring up Res Park here today, Gary, so thank you. But yeah, I know it's you've acknowledged that doesn't fully bring to our attention, but I hope you see my point here, where when we're specifically picking parts of the city where we've got going for lower parking charges for various reasons, and I accept they exist, but then it's a little bit chicken and egg, because we know that there are areas where they do incredibly well. Bishopthorpe Road is probably the shining jewel in the city centre when it comes to retail, at least outside of the immediate city walls. With those low car parking charges, 80p it was until the changes were brought in. Compare that to areas, and I just would appreciate it if, rather than having this piecemeal approach, and this is just more, I suppose, a general comment, Chair, I will be quiet in a second, rather than this piecemeal approach where we look at specific neighbourhoods and try and work it out based on footfall or the impact, the whole thing needs to be joined up. The whole approach needs to be fair and proportionate for the whole city. But at the same time, I think if we get ourselves too deep into the weeds, that's almost what I'm worried this report and the recommendations risk doing. If we pick certain restrictions for one area and certain price charges for another, I'm worried that we're just going to end up making things more unfair, and that's not what anyone wants. That's not a question, that's just my point of view on this, but thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Whitcroft. We've got a couple of supplementaries from members, and I'll go to Councillor Fenton first.
Thank you. Just picking up on that point, I think there was a conscious decision with this report to kind of decouple those two things, and that was made clear at the outset in terms of we're not going to focus on so what do we, what do we do in response? Some options were set out. I think you make a valid point in terms of these particular locations in comparison to others. I would direct people to the local transport strategy implementation plan, because I think there's a risk of us reinventing the wheel, because it was November 2025, or was it 2024, I think. And that kind of sets out a route map in terms of we will develop a consistent and equitable strategy for parking across the city, which balances the needs to provide access and reduce levels of car use. Initially, we will focus on a 2-kilometre radius from the city centre. So that arguably provides the kind of, so what do you do next? So that was in there as a short-term commitment. So that, I would argue, when we come to talk about parking at our July meeting, that's probably where we start, because that's already a council commitment. In terms of the recommendations in this report, I like the idea of the parking evidence report, because that would actually direct the discussion to where I think you're suggesting it needs to go, in terms of what is the evidence for either a blanket approach or a nuanced approach in terms of income, in terms of accessibility. So I think the parking evidence report recommendation is one that I was particularly pleased to see, because that would, if it's done in a way that engages with users of services and retailers, that provides that opportunity to flush out those nuances and the any sort of differential approach that may be warranted between some of the sites. But recognizing this report doesn't necessarily, well, it doesn't say how we might address those locations differently. But I think there is a basis for that conversation to happen, but that's more of sort of medium, longer term. And I'm conscious that from the traders' perspective, there are some short-term actions they would be looking to see happen on the back of this report.
Councillor Clark. Oh, okay, that's fine. Yeah. Sorry, Councillor Fenton, did you have a sort of question directed at an officer that you wanted to respond to?
Unless any of them want to say anything, no, just in response to Councillor Whitcroft's.
Okay, no, that's good. Just checking I haven't ridden over you there. So next is Councillor Healy.
Thanks very much, Chair. This is quite a specific question. On Annex D, car parking income and expenditure, parking expenditure, car parking operations, they've substantially increased, going from 1.8 million to 2.2 million. So that's 400,000. So that's about, I don't know, 20%-ish. So overall, we're now getting less income from this area. Can someone give an explanation of why that's happened?
Business rates revaluation. It's the simplistic approach. With what the valuation agency do is every so many years do a revaluation, and they've looked at the income coming through council car parks, and they have increased the assessment for what business rates should be at those locations. So we'll probably be in the process of challenging some of those, but at the moment that's the assessment. So that's the main item as why operations have gone up.
Oh, thank you.
Any other members? Councillor Perrott.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, taking a while with my mic there. I'd be interested in just understanding a little bit more. I've got a couple of questions really. So one is around the sort of travel data. So obviously there's mention of sort of bus use going up, things like that. How much of this is linked to the changes and how much of this was sort of already ongoing? I suppose I just want to understand whether this changes in sort of pushing people towards using the cars less and parking less is having the intended sort of consequence of pushing people towards sort of active and public transport. And I'll probably let you answer that, and then can I ask another question after, Chair? Thanks.
So, so you're talking about the data on paragraph 71. Earlier in the report, there's a list of different park and ride changes that have taken place over the course of the last year. And it's actually difficult to disaggregate whether people are choosing to use the bus now because of the car parking charging or because of the sort of flexibilities and the different offer provided by the park and ride site. So I can't actually answer that question unless we were to conduct a bus consultation, really. Sorry.
Thanks, Chair. I'll jump back in. So I suppose linked to that is some of this around as well, who's sort of responding to consultations. So if it's self-selecting, who's sort of replying and saying what solutions would work for them and what wouldn't, does that also not help us with getting a sort of broader understanding of what sort of behaviour changes this has driven?
So thank you. I don't know if you could say they're self-selected. So if you look at the way the survey was conducted or the consultation was conducted in Annex C1, 2 and 3 and 4, on occasion, Arup stood on car park corners and grabbed people. So they were car users, and then they also did the same for pedestrians. So people just walking past were asked a series of questions. They're also, the online survey, people were invited to take part online where it was deliberately promoted in local shops and restaurants and bars, so within that particular area. So yes, self-selected in the sense that people had a view and they wanted to answer questions, not necessarily so in the sense that we only chose people who were, I don't know, cycling or, came to that shop every week or whatever. So they were as broad a range of people covering as many different demographics who were in that particular area for all sorts of different reasons, as opposed to helping us maybe make a statement through an independent research. And that was the value of really going out to an independent consultancy to run that research. They had no vested interest in making any points, so they just selected people who were prepared to answer, really.
Brilliant, thank you. It just wasn't sort of clear in the methodology sort of explanation how people were invited to take part. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Councillor Vassie.
Thank you, Chair. So we've been living with this now for about 18 months. We're all around the table aware of the kind of controversies and the back and forth that has happened. I very much welcome the Arup report. I'm still confused as to why these charges were increased the way they were increased. I don't find that in this report. We know why the parking charges were lower in Bishopthorpe Road, in Micklegate, Heath and the Groves. It was to support local businesses and shops in recognition of the challenges that those smaller businesses face. Trying to make sense of why 500% increases were proposed and then reduced and whatever is far less clear to me from this. I do see lots of references to climate change and carbon emissions and all things that I think all of us around this table consider to be very important. But I can't help, and you'll forgive me for this, Chair, comparing this attitude that car parking charges should go up to reduce carbon emissions and drive the change to a low carbon future, when in the same areas, thousands of homes are denied access to cross-pavement EV charging. So if the challenge is to cut carbon emissions, where's the consistency in approach? There's paragraph after paragraph talking about climate change and the switch to EV vehicles and the share of vehicles that are electric. I welcome all of that, but I don't see how this fits together. So my question really is, what at heart is this about? Is this simply about increasing car parking revenue for the city? In which case, let's just say that. And Councillor Whitcroft made the point, should it be the same everywhere across the city? Or is there something else? And how do we actually balance the strategy that's set out in this report about changing to a low carbon future, reducing combustion engine transport? How do we balance that with our needs to protect the economy of the city, the shopping centres in different parts of the city, and the various conflicting priorities that seem to exist here?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Vassie. You've identified, you've noticed, I guess, or identified one of the real challenges with policy. So you do have, we have a really strong and clear policy framework adopted by executive, approved by council, covering, as you say, climate change, health and wellbeing, economy, and then later the local transport strategy, which clearly sets out the intention to reduce the number of journeys made in the city, and to do so, increase the number of the opportunities of sustainable transport and walking and cycling where possible to reduce car dependency. However, as you've noticed, there could be an impact on local economies as a result. And we've pulled together a huge amount of data in the report that's linked to the report through the movement and place data, which is published monthly on the open data platform, that shows footfall in those different areas and recognises the challenge to high streets and essentially the decline in high streets, that is not as a result of car park charging, but as a result of all sorts of different things that are going on across the country and indeed across the world, geopolitics having its role, that we need to be really careful about how we balance delivering climate change, health and wellbeing and economic strategy so they work collectively together rather than oppose each other. And I think today the recommendations from ARUP have set out some real clear examples about what we can do to do that, and would be really interested in members' views here today around particularly Annex C, which sets out those different recommendations about how you can do just that balancing of different policies, strategy, environments.
Can I respond, Chair? So thank you for that. We heard from the traders, the speakers at the start, a general engagement with those climate ambitions. What I think might help them and might help members of the public who are increasingly cynical about all the work that all of us do, is if there was some kind of way of demonstrating that if you're going to get more money from car parking, that revenue is actually going to be spent on improving bus services so that people can actually use an alternative, rather than seeing monies taken as a form of taxation for one thing, and then just disappearing into a pot and never seeming to drive the change to a more sustainable future. So I'm afraid I haven't been able to go through the ARUP report to that detail, but that's certainly something that I think would resonate and respond to some of the points raised by the speakers earlier on. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah, Chair, for you. Yeah, so page 226 outlines all the funding and income we receive from parking charges does go into sustainable futures around transport, highways and improvements. Everything goes back and is reinvested into our transport and highway network.
Yeah. All I can say to that is that my residents would love to see demonstrable benefits where they are, because our bus services stay where they are year in, year out. I used to go to Bishopthorpe Road occasionally to deliver parcels because there was a great drop-off place. I used the short-term half-an-hour option to park my car quickly, run down to one of the shops, drop my parcels off. I abandoned that when the fees went up because it simply didn't add up anymore. And so I think if there's more, thank you for directing me towards that page. I think if there was more evidence, if it was clearer, and people could see the benefit, we'd make better progress. Thank you.
Can I just clarify that? So, Councillor Bassey, you're looking for granular detail. So you've got an overarching city picture here. So if I pick up one, subsidised bus services, 458k last year, 881k this year. But that doesn't tell us where that just less than 400,000 was spent, does it? So are you looking for, this ward, those schemes, that kind of detail?
Yes, for all the wards. I mean, in Bishopthorpe and Micklegate, as well as everywhere else. I think if all of us had a clear sense that the world was becoming a better place as the result of decisions, I think there'd be more support for the kind of initiatives that can be proposed in this area.
Thank you. If I may, Chair, I mean, it is all of it, every single penny of it gets spent on transport and highways. It'll be hard into the granular detail because actually we're not a transport authority, we've not got a mature mayoral authority, so therefore it's a drop in the ocean comparatively. If you West Yorkshire Combined Authority, we've done massive transport authority. They've got probably 40, 50 times more funding per head of population, so on this area. So it is a drop in the ocean, but it is doing things like extended park and rides, concessionary fares for young people. So it strategically is having, and we can see that, an impact, but always welcome more campaigning for additional funding, but and all the money that is made from car parking is going back into transport and highways.
Okay, thank you. Couple of supplementaries on this, but very quickly just say that that document that's being referred to is at page 225, 226, and I know it's kind of in the middle of the Arab report, so Councillor Whitcroft.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Councillor Vassie, I feel like sort of proving my point from earlier, just in a different tangent. And I understand Councillor Fenton sort of disagree with me here. We can't really have a discussion about just Bishy Road or just Heworth or just the Groves without really talking about the wider situation of Park, without talking about Weldrake or Fishergate. Just on the EV charging, you know, that itself is a whole other thing we tried to explore before. My understanding, though, and when we talk about wanting to see tangible results, and I'm hoping if officers might be able to provide a view here, we would really struggle to improve. Bus services have already improved, and I'd like to see sort of the link between that and the parking charges. But we would really struggle to improve bus services anyway if everyone was still using their car, because the buses would just get caught up in the same congestion, whether it's an EV car or not. Obviously, we'd all prefer it to be an EV car, but improving public transport kind of relies on having an approach where you acknowledge that people need to use it first. Because if we've just got empty buses going down the road with no one in them and everyone else using a car, of course no one's going to want to engage public transport. So I sort of understood. I think this, one of the public speakers actively acknowledged the irony there, but you know, we can't really improve public transport unless we're starting to get the necessary income for the transport funding. And a lot of the time that has to come from our main revenue raiser for transport, which as far as I understand it is the parking charges. So that was my understanding of the strategy. And I know that it's sort of a difficult pill to swallow, but I think, you know, if we can have that strong discussion and you make sure that, I know the minutes being taken, make sure that that is being informed for our next meeting on parking. But yes, just generally, just the question around the impact that congestion might be having on public transport and balancing that with the parking charges. And also, bingo card time, I'm going to ask about Res Park. I know that that was included in the recommendations. I know that we can't discuss sort of the wider Res Park issue at the moment, but how we might be able to link Res Park to this issue specifically raised in the report around parking charges. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, so that, I mean, that's the third I've made a note already in terms of, I mean, obviously low carbon's a key important outcome across our strategies, but fundamentally, if we see the growth that we're already seeing in terms of the network, and then we're to build a lot of new homes, York Central, effectively our network will snarl to a point where it's not just buses that we'll be able to get through, it'll be cars. So it's as much, I mean, longer term, this is as much pro car as it is bus in respect to we need both to be able to get around the network, because our city, we have an outer ring road that doesn't fully function as an outer ring road. There's going to be significant growth both in the west and in the north and in the east beyond our boundaries. Significant growth to the north, all of which will come through our network. And our modelling shows effectively with that growth on the outer ring road, people start to use the inner more in terms of natural propensity. So it's that balance between how do we get a really efficient bus service that people like to use, and how do we ensure also those cars that need to be on the network and essential, which they always will be, can get in and around the core of the city as well. And we're constantly trying to balance all of that. And that will, because we're in a growth scenario, get worse. So yeah, it's absolutely that. And at the point I made, it's also then trying to balance that impact on a local level. You know, and that's the kind of work we've been doing with Arabs is how can we make some strategic cases, particularly to mayoral funds, to bring that investment in to balance that immediate impact, which, you know, a lot of the good examples here that will be reflected from your feedback and the discussions we've had today.
Okay. And the Res Park?
I was trying to avoid that one, so I wasn't. I mean, the problem, Res Park it's not a forced tool. So we engage with communities and residents, and there's a process there where those residents want to have Res Park. So the tool effectively is a resident-driven tool that we engage with. We have changed in the last year the way in which we approach that. So we go in with a much more open dialogue in around each of those localities. But as a city, we're not imposing Res Park. So it's not a strategic tool in that way.
Some of the recommendations talk about utilising Res Park as a way of trying to alleviate some of the issues. I think it was a recommendation too.
Yeah.
I just wanted to, if we can't use it as a, I know we can't use, I know Res Park
Yeah.
quite well, but then are we sort of ruling Res Park out then as a potential
No,
from the recommendations?
fundamentally, I mean, you, and I'm not suggesting we do, and no one's to quote it, you could impose Res Park through a process. Obviously, there's a process, then people can object to that. But we're not, in our strategic tools, we're not imposing Res Park. It's not a done to thing. It's an engaging with thing. And, you know, we want those residents and communities to engage with Res Park. And it could be that we could focus in on those areas and engage where there's, so it is something that we utilise, but only where those communities want to work with us and want Res Park. There are some localities, some cities that have just imposed Res Park zones, but that's not the approach we take. And I'm not saying it could be an approach, but that had to be led through the exec.
Okay, Councillor Clark.
Chair. Yeah, we've explored this quite a bit. I mean, I was just going to come back, I suppose, on a couple of points being raised here. And so I think in the report it does say quite a bit about transparency, and residents and traders wanting to see how that money from car parking is reinvested, if you like, in public transport, and wanting to see that. And some of your comments are saying that, well, we don't really have oversight of that because we're not the Transport Authority anymore. I'm just wondering what opportunities there might be for that transparency to get the word out there, and how that might take form. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, there's full transparency. I mean, we at the moment the mayoral have delegated the Transport Authority back down to us, so we're running the bus network still. The intention is for that to go into the mayoral authority, and they hold the powers. But yeah, on page 226, there's full transparency of where the money's spent.
Yeah, I mean, in our report, but I suppose what I'm getting at, and this picks up a point that Councillor Vossi was saying earlier, is that how do we actually relay that to the public at large, if you like, to the city as a whole? Because I'm not sure everybody will read Annex D or C in a council report. Yeah, thank you.
No, that's a fair challenge, although part of the government transparency data is that there is a requirement for us to produce a parking account every year, and the parking account is on the council website every financial year. We've gone into more granular detail this year as part of the review, and as part of doing this, we will ensure that the parking data, or the parking report that we do each year, will now have this level of data in it, rather than a historic where we've said this is the amount of income we've received and we spend all that income on highways and transport. We will actually go to that level of more detail.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hook.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to point out, I welcome comment on page 70. It's the third one in paragraph 5.1 about digital exclusion, because we have enormous problems in my ward in Poppleton Station, where the parking system is digital exclusion, so that people are parking on the road, where luckily they can still park, because they can't park in the car park because it's so difficult to pay. So that's one of the things that you should consider. And also, when you're trying to drive everybody onto cycling, just a plea for people. I used to cycle every day to go to work from Poppleton to Fulford, no problem. I can't even get on a bike now. There's a whole category of people in that grey area, not in blue badges, but who can no longer cycle. And so we rely on buses and walking. And Bishopthorpe Road is not an easy place to get to, especially from the west of the city. And I also know that people from Askham Bryan always used to go to Bishopthorpe Road. They don't anymore because they don't have the buses to get there. So they go somewhere else. Wetherby is now the main destination point for most of my residents because they can get free parking in Wetherby. So that's just another comment. But I welcome that comment on the payment system.
Okay. I will ask a question as well, and then I'll come to Councillor Vassy. In public participation, it was raised about the car parking strategy. Myself and Councillor Healy have been written to see if we can find a draft car parking strategy. That it was mentioned in public participation should have been due in November last year. Can somebody shed some light on that for me? Because for my knowledge, we've got the local transport plan, we've got an implementation plan phase, which is live and should be, I think it's 24 to 26. So what comes next on car parking strategy?
I acknowledge it's in the implementation plan for the local transport strategy, but the work has not started yet due to resources, so it will have to be a decision on prioritization.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Vassy.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to pick up another of the points that were raised by the public speakers. So a couple of them mentioned one of the options that has come back to us on several occasions and been rehearsed about a short 30-minute option for people to just pop into local shops. And the fact that this had been picked up in the ARIP report and was something that they were hoping would be followed up. So I just wanted to crystallize that I think I've understood over the months has been an issue here. So if there was an intention, I thought that part of the intention of raising the prices so high was to stop people misusing, in inverted commas, those non-city centre car parks in order to stay all day, but to have parked somewhere else and not be paying what they would have been paying if they'd been in a city centre car park. And all the way through, we've kind of been aware that there is an easy option here, that if anyone stays more than 2 hours, you slap them exactly the same price as you'd charge if you were in all the other main car parks, but that you recognise that there is this different group of people who just want to pop in for 20 minutes, just pop into the greengrocers, pop into the laundrette and come out. I hope that in the months ahead, in the discussions that go on, we genuinely look at trying to do that, because we all know from this report, 67% of business respondents saying they've got lower spend and fewer customers. And I think it appears common sense that making it easier for those people who used to just pop in and then leave won't stop the council from earning revenue from the people who are simply saying, oh, I'll park a little bit further out and we can park all day, it won't cost us anything. It'll sort that problem out without harming local businesses. So I hope we go in that direction.
Any more? Yes, Councillor Clark.
It was a sort of supplementary. Just obviously there would be a financial impact on reintroducing short-term parks. I just wondered whether you might be able to illuminate a bit or explain a little bit more about that and what the kind of impact of that might be.
So parking policy shouldn't be driven by financial impact, and isn't. So the reality is we'd have to factor that in to obviously the financial baseline. When the reality is, I mean, you wouldn't be looking at significant sums. So I think when we're making any recommendations to exec, it'll be more just align with the policy and the strategy. If that's not really a direct answer, but
I understand that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Perrott.
Thanks, Chair. I suppose just follow on from the past couple of questions. So it's more about sort of constructive ways forward, really. I've been scanning through Annex B, and obviously the speakers tonight have been sort of sharing different ideas for their recommendations. I suppose I'd like to understand how much sort of thought has gone into the recommendations already that have been made, because I think it feels hard for me to sort of pull things out of this without knowing the background to sort of how realistic and how feasible they are to actually bring them in. So I'm thinking things like the Minster badge. Could we do reductions that are targeted to community shopping areas? Councillor Vass's suggestion around sort of having different pricing for the first part of the stay and then bringing it in line with the sort of car park charges more broadly. I suppose, what do we think is possible from these lists of interventions? Because from my reading, it looked like Harrop had sort of directly lifted recommendations from each of the different areas that were made. How feasible is it to do different recommendations in different areas? I think for me, I'm just sort of struggling with what I could pull out to say, yes, I think this is a recommendation that we could go forward with on the information that we've got. So I guess my question in a nutshell is, are the possible, what do we think we can actually look at? What could we implement from some of these mitigation proposals? Because there's a lot there that seem like really reasonable suggestions that could be implementable. But I think it's just hard for me, based on what I've got in the report, to actually pull those out and say, yes, that one seems like an idea we could go for. Sorry, that was a very long question, wasn't it?
So the recommendations in the Arup report, we've reviewed that with officers just for the legal background. Can it actually legally be delivered? So all of these are possible legally, but obviously, as you'll have seen in the recommendations, Arup always point out that there might be conflict in policy. So, you know, what we've just discussed about the short stay, half an hour, are you going to encourage people to take their car to go to Bishop Thorpe for an hour? And is that in agreement with local transport policy? And that's this balancing question that we've been trying to address, really.
Okay. Yeah, Councillor Healy.
Isn't the crux of this that you either need to prioritise your economic strategy or you need to prioritise your local transport strategy? Because we've heard from the speakers that by emphasising the local transport strategy, which is putting up the price of the car parks to encourage people to not drive, to use other types of transport, you're having an economic impact on them. So if we're going to prioritise the transport strategy, we should keep this as it is. If we're going to recognise the economic policy, then as a scrutiny committee, we should be recommending a reduction in the charge. It's that at the crux of this, the question that we're being asked. And the question that
there's
the
more
executive...
if I can, sorry.
No.
Yeah, through check. There's more nuance to that. So there will be other factors in the economic situation. I mean, we know there's national, sub-regional, and I'm not saying in any way, shape or form that there hasn't been some impact in terms of parking. It's just difficult to pull those factors apart. And obviously the more local you get, there will be more nuance in terms of those factors if there's a direct car park that relates to. The actual transport strategy is as much as an economic strategy, because it's the point I made earlier, is if we don't keep the network running for those people that need the network for economically and other purposes, social well-being purposes, it will have a direct economic impact, as in if the roads are not free running. So some of this is as much as economic as it is on a wider sense, not as granular. What this is looking at, so do we for the, and that will be subject to the exec report and taking account the range of Arup options, and we will likely be presenting some of these options. It's not that we're just going to go away and come back to exec saying, actually don't go any of these. So is which ones still fit in that nuance? So which ones will not have that significant impact but have a potential benefit to those localities? There'll also be other factors we can bring into this in terms of, and I'm not saying a lot of these are external funds now, so they sit in their rural. So is there other improvements we can make to these localities to make them more desirable, or to bring more buses, or to promote them more, or to improve some of the public realm elements, some of the connectivity in terms of cycling? So the two don't necessarily work separate. Place works as a connective whole, but there's just that granular detail that that blanket approach, because this piece of work wasn't done, has caught up these particularly Bishy Road. So
Okay, on this, councillor Clark? No, I'll put you on the list. Okay, so I'm gonna start to try and make some progress, as councillor Healy also tried a moment ago. So we're asked to consider providing feedback on the independent parking charges review and the recommendations. We've been doing that quite well. From my perspective, you know, I would want all of the recommendations in the report to be, you say that they've gone through legal, which is absolutely right. I would want them to be genuinely considered and put to executive, specifically picking up the ones that you think can make a difference. And I'll say for my part, listening to public speakers on it, I've got real sympathy for them finding out that the charges at their local car park serving their businesses and local residents that rely on some of those shops down there increasing by 500%. You know, that's, for me, that's a big shock. And there is recommendation in the report that says that we should be running future consultations proactively through the types of groups that can feed in at a really early stage. You know, because council's obviously made a decision to pull that back down because it's recognised. And so we could avoid that in future. That's a good recommendation. So my feedback would be that that's got a star next to it, but I don't want to discount any other recommendations. I'd like to see executive challenged and given the right information that says that they can adopt all of these recommendations and what is wrong with them if they can't do that. I'll provide a little bit more feedback, then I'll go round the room, and then we'll see where we're at the end. I don't have any more questions. I'm just getting a couple of points across. I think there is a real key discussion to be had around secondary shopping areas. Councillor Whitcroft talked about it. There is some preliminary evidence and work being done by Bishopthorpe Road traders around Acomb and Haxby, you know, as being designated by the council for its economic importance. And I think recommendation 2, striking the right balance, finding whether there is options for free limited periods of parking is a really important one, because even within this report, we've got some areas that are different to others. So the Bishopthorpe Road one's clear case for it to be in that secondary shopping area distinction, but maybe the Groves and the Hewth one not quite as strong because it's a smaller car parking area. So there are nuances. And that recommendation at 5.2 is really important. I think there must be levers that you can pull to encourage local shoppers and residents to have accessibility to their local high street. And then lastly from me is the Minster badge. I think I'm really surprised by reading it in the report. You know, I think a lot of people forget about it. It's a massive tool that the council can use, and I would hope that, having seen this recommendation, that we could put something together to executive to say we want loads of people to know about Minster badge, really improved incentives, and get a higher take up from residents on it. those are the three big ones from me. I had a big spiel about something else, but I will save the world that and move to Councillor Fenton.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, the recommendations, some are more specific than others, but few of them you would disagree with. Again, I think it will come back to prioritisation. We've heard that the parking strategy in the local transport strategy implementation plan hasn't started, and that was a short-term commitment. So I think, and I'm sure officers have already done this in terms of where, if anywhere, are the quick wins? Where are the actions that will have most impact? And, you know, from the point of view of the people who spoke tonight who instigated this review, they will not unreasonably be looking for some action. And I think clearly the area that has the most potential is the sort of targeted charging measures, whether that's some kind of promotion on Minster Badge, whether it's a introduction of a short stay, lower cost option. I think that has to be where the starting point is. But I don't underestimate the importance of some of the other recommendations in terms of articulating a vision, in terms of here's a stick, but here are all these carrots, and this is what we're doing to make these even more attractive. So, you know, we're not starting from a great place in terms of we're having this discussion because of a process that really we shouldn't have had to have gone through. But it does provide an opportunity, I think, to improve things going forward. But yeah, my plea would be to, in that prioritisation, look at the things that could have most impact, which the petitioners would not unreasonably expect us to prioritise.
Thanks, Councillor Fenton. Councillor Clark.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So yeah, just coming back, I suppose, on a couple of those things. So one of the speakers did mention, particularly in relation to Bishop Road earlier, about protected characteristics and accessibility, and how those that fall out, if you like, the blue badge scheme are disadvantaged. And this is mentioned in the report. I just wanted to kind of add my kind of support to making sure that was addressed really in anything that is taken forward in the report. So I wanted to say that secondarily, we've mentioned the Minster Badge, which, yeah, great scheme and should be promoted and perhaps isn't promoted enough. But in some ways, it's a sort of a clarification, because I did notice, you know, Groves is on my patch. I know Lowther Street, but when I looked at the council's website about where the Minster Badge can be used on street parking, I think there were certain areas in Guildhall, like Warmgate and Lawrence Street, that were included, but then I don't see where Lowther Street, for example, where the shopping parade in the Groves is, which is one of the areas that we're talking about, is included in that Minster Badge scheme. So I just wanted to kind of push to say, if it isn't, it should be, and just to take that into consideration as well. Yeah, thanks.
Councillor Healy.
Thank you. I would echo the comments by the other people here, particularly recommendation 5.2, the first bullet point. Picking up on the comments made on the Minster Badge, it's a scheme that's been around quite a long time. I believe it was made more appealing in the first Tory supporting administration in 2007. But
that's when you were a Tory.
It was. That's why I remember it, because I was the shadow executive person. Anyway, that's not the point. Yeah, really. Thank you. Chair, could you please stop the heckling? It's probably something that needs to be looked at again, because at its basis, it's encouraging people to drive their car into the town centre. And it's also a fixed cost. So the more that you drive, the cheaper your Minster bag per trip comes. So I can understand why it's a popular thing, but it drives a coach and horses through what you're trying to achieve in virtually all of your other policy areas. And also, we're subsidising buses in the evening because there's not enough patronage. But on the other hand, we're offering a subsidy to people in York to drive their car. So it probably needs to be looked at about what it's trying to achieve. And I say that as it won't be particularly popular. But yeah, it's something that you need to tweak so it supports what you're trying to achieve, as opposed to, I'd suggest, going directly off against it. Thank you.
Any more from anyone? I'll have Councillor Whitcroft and then
Thanks, Chair. I echo a lot of the recommendations already put forward. I just think, and probably no surprise, just thinking holistically, I think has got to be a key recommendation here. We can't just be thinking, I know that this report is just focused on the specific areas that we've discussed, but as we've all acknowledged, that this has got to tie into what's coming next for the parking strategy, how we're going to make sure that we can have a sustainable city centre and areas just outside it, sort of like a secondary area around it. I would try and emphasise fairness. I'd probably bang the drum a bit too hard on that one, to be honest. But you know, for a councillor for a neighbouring ward, I think you can understand the level of frustration some of my residents might feel. So yeah, I just want us to not be necessarily constrained. So I'm happy for all of the options to go forward, because I don't want the executive to be restrained. I want them to be able to make the full extent of the decision. But let's think about what we're going to be doing in July, and they need to make sure that they are making decisions here in tune with what we want our parking strategy to look like over the decades ahead, basically. Thank you.
thank you, Councillor Vassy.
Thank you, Chair. Just a last point I'd like to raise, because it's not been rehearsed in this meeting and I've not seen it in this. I think it's well understood that one of the objectives here is to stop cars travelling to Bishopthorpe Road as an example. And that's seen as a way of reducing emissions, reducing congestion, and so on and so forth. What is less understood is that if we lose those local shopping streets, we will in effect be encouraging more vehicles to travel out of town shopping centres, to other cities, to other places, and that the net impact is going to be quite possibly more carbon emissions rather than lower carbon emissions. I have to remind you that this is an area full of terrace streets where very few people have electric cars. It would be, I suggest, a calamity if Bishopthorpe Road failed and these other places failed and everyone was obliged to travel 3 and 4 miles to out-of-town shopping centres. So when we create these arguments about transport movements, about local shopping areas and businesses, all the rest of it, I hope that we will bear in mind that transport travels in multiple directions and that we need to protect things like Bishopthorpe Road as much to save people from having to drive 4 miles out of town as to keep a place that's open for people to come to visit.
Yep. Okay. Would anybody like to round up from the top end of the table? You don't have to, just opportunity there, Claire.
Just to thank everyone for their contributions today. Behind me are the public participants and also the petitioners and the correspondents who committed their time to respond to the consultation. I think it's been a really rich conversation. It's provided us with loads of different information to go away with and look at in more detail when we come back to executive for executive member to make a decision or recommendation to executive for a decision. We haven't got an answer sitting here today. You've recognised how tricky and difficult it is to balance those competing needs, but collectively we'll work together to come up with something for executive to consider.
Councillor Avilius.
Thank you. So yeah, I just want to express my thanks to the ARUP team and to our officers who have put all that time and expertise in bringing forward this parking review. Big thank you to residents, visitors and businesses, those here today and those who who've responded to the consultation for their time, their local knowledge, and the insight that they've brought to this consultation. And thanks to you, the Scrutiny Committee, for taking the time to read an immense amount of information and really think about it and bring that debate to the table. It's been, you know, very valuable. Just to summarise some of the findings that I've pulled out from this review and the insights that we've gained from the data that's been gathered. So firstly, I note that the ARUP review confirms that York's parking prices are broadly similar to charges in other UK cities and with similar social and economic profiles. And when we made that decision to increase the parking charges in early 2025, it was grounded in evidence, which we didn't communicate clearly enough, but it was grounded in evidence from other locations and aligned to our objectives in the transport strategy. And the parking review does recognise the role that York's parking management plays in that wider policy framework. And I think so part of the debate that's come out tonight is it's not as simple as supporting an economic strategy or supporting a transport strategy. You know, traffic congestion costs the economy and has to be tackled, and there is a balancing act to be played, and it's a really complex and difficult one. And previously, we had a hodgepodge of parking pricing around the city, and that wasn't fair and equitable either. And I acknowledge we haven't hit the right balance. We still need to revisit and look at what that balance needs to be, but it wasn't working previously either, when we had, you know, prices ranging from 80p to £3.60, depending on which area you chose to park. So our model that we put forward was centred around increasing the cost of the first 2 hours of car parking to be equivalent to the price of a family bus ticket, to incentivise people to choose to use the bus rather than to drive. And contrary to some of the comments that have been made, the transport data demonstrates that we have seen a positive shift towards sustainable travel since those increased parking charges were introduced, in particular on the park and ride, which has seen good growth and in December had the highest figures ever last year. And we've seen greater numbers of people choosing to cycle, so an over 6% increase last year. Walking, we unfortunately don't have enough reliable data at the moment, but that's something we're working on. It's been fantastic to see Bishey Road traders be successful in being awarded mayoral funding and working on experimenting with reallocating car parking and road space and finding innovative ways to encourage sustainable travel and to boost trade. And those kind of initiatives are exactly the kind of work that we want to do together with you as traders and really bring that forward with other parts of the city too. We don't yet have the visitor numbers for York for 2025, but I'd anticipate that they'll be down compared to 2024, reflecting the national and global factors that we've talked about, and that's dented consumer confidence and knocked the UK economy. And so seeing that growth in sustainable travel is heartening against that challenging economic picture that we had last year. And in the areas surveyed, that consumer confidence globally and nationally is mirrored in the data that we see. So it's significantly impacted geopolitical conflicts, inflation, and so on, and that's detailed in the report. Obviously, local factors also have an impact. The weather, the parking prices, roadworks in the city, all play a role, and that report acknowledges that we can't unpick one thing from the other, so it's really hard to see what impact any one thing has had. Having said all of that, acknowledge that we could have implemented the changes in parking prices in a better way, and there are some hugely valuable lessons that we've learned through the review process. It's been painful, but I want to move forward and look at those recommendations seriously. I agree that a car parking strategy is something that we need to move forward on. To be honest, the reason that hasn't moved forward as quickly as we want is we've been absorbed with dealing with the parking review, and just capacity is absolutely stretched across the transport team. So we haven't been able to bring forward the parking review that we'd hoped to in the implementation plan. I fully recognise the need for more comprehensive consultation and engagement with local residents and businesses around significant changes like this. And I'm more than willing to embrace the need for greater transparency around how we spend the revenue from parking, and to demonstrate how it's used to improve sustainable travel. I can confirm it does all go back into transport, but we need to do more to really show that and link it back to our policy objectives. And there is room to review our parking pricing model and better align it with the complementary measures that we've been able to start delivering, such as the increased hours on park and ride buses and forthcoming bus priority measures and so on. So just to be put some time frame on this, we'll be bringing over the next couple of months, I'll be working with officers to take on board the recommendations and review those and the recommendations that have come from Scrutiny, and bringing a report back to executive in the autumn. And then there is a time period in terms of how quickly we can implement any changes. So I just want to be really clear about that, that the time period for implementing any changes to parking, for example, would have to go through traffic regulation orders. There's a legislative process to follow. So I'm really pleased to be working on those recommendations, but it's not going to be an instant change that we can bring forward. So I just wanted to be clear on that as well. But I think we're on a journey towards the right place, and I'm really grateful for all the work that's gone into this from everybody. Thank you.
I really appreciate that, Councillor Revelius. A good summary. And with that, I will move the committee on to our next item, and thanking you all for your participation in that item. We're going to have a break. Yeah, we'll have a break before we get to the next item. So 5 minutes-ish. Welcome back. We should be live, so we will carry on with agenda item 6, and it is the recycling review. And before I say it, I'm not sure if this is pre-decision scrutiny or if it's not. So somebody's going to have to make that clear to me. It's in my pack as saying that it is, but it's not a mistake I've made before, but it's something that I've had to clarify in meeting before. And so that'd be good to confirm. So I'm not sure if it is actually pre-decision scrutiny, but the intention, I'm sure, was for it to be pre-decision scrutiny. So the executive approved in March 26 to undertake public engagement with residents on a recycling review. This report outlines the results and the feedback from that consultation, and I would look to hand over to Dave Atkinson, Director of Environmental and Regulatory Services, and Ian Holt, Head of Environmental Services, alongside the Executive Member, Councillor Kent, to introduce the item, please.
Thanks very much, Chair. As you say, this is the product of a paper we took to Executive in March this year, which was to explore options around changing how we our recycling regime in the city. The recommendation from the exec report was to undertake a consultation, which I'll pass over to Ian to talk about in a minute. And the intention is to take a decision to July executive. So this would be pre-decision scrutiny, or at least scrutiny before a decision.
Thank
Ian, sorry, Ian, I'll hand over to yourself.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Chair. So I'll just talk through a little bit of a background around since March, as Dave's alluded to. Executive approved some public engagement and a survey consultation with residents. That, in terms of scope, was around 67,000 properties across the city. So that did exclude flats and maisonettes and any properties around 7,000 that was included in the most recent bags to bin scheme. So the consultation was live between 23rd of March and 1st of May. That was an online survey. There was also an offline option for residents to complete, and officers provided drop-in sessions throughout the consultation period, so residents could attend and ask questions, also fill in paper forms, and be informed of what the proposal or gather feedback in terms of recycling boxes to bins. So we're here today to ask committee to consider the consultation feedback and provide any further feedback to help us as officers make an informed consideration of moving from recycling boxes to recycling bins for those properties that are in the first or in scope of any kind of first proposal or implementation. Just adding to that, also consider the legislation that is incoming now and forthcoming in future years through national simpler recycling reforms, with the idea of that on a national scale is to make recycling at the curbside much simpler across the country for residents. So in terms of a bit of analysis around I'll give a brief overview of the analysis of the consultation. It was a really well participated consultation with over 13,000 responses. Annex A shows the responses per ward. There are some further annexes that provide support and some further detail. In terms of some of the common themes that come across throughout the consultation in the feedback is that recycling for capacity at properties currently in its current state is lacking somewhat, and they either don't recycle or they don't have the storage to do so, or some do store. Annex C supports a little bit more information on that. Also, one of the common themes or a barrier in terms of the current setup in terms of recycling is the environment impact, often with weather conditions, collection days. You know, that there is spilt materials which contributes to litter on our streets.
there were some other common themes as well, which were fully expected given spaces at a premium in York in terms of inside property boundaries. So space and storage concerns, some options for smaller bins, bin sizes, the cost of the investment and the obstruction or enforcement around containers that are presented on the curbside during collection days or just after. So, as I say, we're keen to hear feedback from committee today. There's a couple of areas that I'd like to, or a couple of points I'd like to point out that we in particular want to hear about. Should we be looking at offering smaller sized containers in terms of wheeled bins as part of any proposal or rollout? Our current refuse size bin is 180 litres, and as part of this recycling review, we were offering 240 litre, which would be two of those sized bins. A couple of reasons for that is we want to encourage more recycling, so you would offer a bigger capacity in terms of your refuse container. But given some of the feedback, should we be considering smaller containers for those properties that have got space at a premium? We do have to continue in two streams because of the national recycling reforms and because of our facilities now. It wouldn't be prudent for us to mix materials, so it would be a paper and card stream and it would be a tins, plastic, glass stream in any case, no matter container size. We've also been exploring options with St Nick's, so we do know that within that 67,000 in scope, there will be some that still have further difficulties, even with smaller wheeled bin containers. So should we really be considering furthering the scope of what St Nick's already do for us within the city centre, and see what they can provide? That would mean that those properties could possibly remain on boxed collections, but it would have to be feasible in terms of, for us as an authority and St Nick's as an organisation as well, to consider that. Thank you.
Yes, Dave.
Sorry, Chair, there's... just wanted to be clear about what we'd gone out to consult on. Do you want to go over that, Ian, please? Just so that the committee's aware of what the regime was that we consulted on.
Yeah, sorry. So we currently collect 2 weekly on recycling, and every material type, although in 2 streams, will be collected at the curbside at that point. This proposal would move to 2 wheeled bins. Again, as I've just said, the materials would stay separate, paper card in one container, tins, plastic, glass in the other. The collection frequency for each container would be 4 weekly. So that means residents would still receive a 2 weekly recycling collection. To give an example, they would receive a refuse collection, a recycling collection of one material, a refuse collection, and the recycling collection of the other material. So paper card and tins, plastic, glass would remain separate. That'd give that'd maintain two weekly collections on recycling, although each material will be collected on 4-week basis. But through this, the capacity for holding them materials in the containers, which would be much more contained as opposed to boxes, would actually be increased on average of what we know now, which is 3 boxes per household, generally across the piece.
Okay, thank you so much. Councillor Hook, you're in first.
Thank you. I mean, there's lots I like about the idea, especially being able to separate the cardboard from the glass and things, because a lot of people get very lazy about that and don't separate it properly, which really annoys me. So that's really good. And it stops your paper getting wetter, which I believe is a consideration. So that's all wonderful. The main thing I would say is would it be possible to actually ask people what size they needed? Because there are some houses that are multiple generation houses where you've got 2 generations, mother and children and father and children, and then granny and granddad in the attic. So it's effectively 2 houses in one. And they reckon that they would need more than the 1 bin each, even the bigger ones. But then there's people like me, live on their own, don't buy much anyway. And I could do with a 180 and it would still be only half full after 4 weeks. But you know, it's just, but talk to people and see what they need. That's the main thing. And the other concern is glass, because I don't drink that much out of bottles apart from the off gin. But it would be nice to know that when I drop my bottle from a great height, because I can't do it by leaning in because I'm vertically challenged, that it won't smash at the bottom. Not gin bottles because they're thick, but a thinner bottle.
Yeah, I think that's something that shone through in the consultation. Certainly, the drop-in sessions is around the size of the bins, and you know, is there options for different bins? It would be very difficult for us to administer people requesting as a whole on a scale that big different size bins. I think what we've learned from colleagues in other local authorities that rolled out a similar scheme or the same scheme essentially is encourage the larger use of the bins. When I say larger, the 240 litre that we're offering with this, see how you get on, kind of thing, and do that, and then potentially request a smaller size bin. And in that first stage, there may be options to swap out for smaller bins for residents. I think in terms of larger bins, as you were saying, those households there might be multiple families or larger families living together. I think that's something that it'd be remiss of us not to consider. The 360 litre bins, what you're talking about there, are quite big, but I think it's something that we could consider. We do offer that for our residual collections as well for larger families. So I think that's, going forward, I think that, should this be a proposal that is implemented, that we could consider that for those larger families.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Clark on that.
Thanks, Chair. Just coming back on that, it's just a supplementary really about the bins size and just understanding whether you could have different sized bins in one street, or whether one street would have to have the same size bin, if you see what I mean. So is it possible for there to be different size bins in one street to all be collected? What's the impact on the service? Is that possible, or are there certain restrictions and limitations in how it can be that kind of multi-size bin approach?
I think so in terms of a street that would remain on collections carried out by our service, I think having different sized bins per property, again, because if they'd have to be requested, it's for smaller bins, for instance, on an individual basis. So I think that would be something that'd be possible. It would have to be the same bin size for each material, just from an administrative point of view for us. So I for example, 240 litre for both streams or 180 litre for both streams. I think, as I say though, on the street, I think yes, properties could have individual sizes at that first request. I don't think we wouldn't want to be in a space where we're constantly swapping bins out for different sizes. So it'd have to be, this is where we try and encourage the larger bins initially, and sort of scope out how our residents are getting on. One thing I would touch on though is, if St Nick's are an option to support us in terms of maintaining box collections, those streets would have to remain on box collections, and individuals couldn't have, a collection by us for wheeled bins and a box collection for St Nick's. It just wouldn't work logistically, and environmentally it wouldn't be very good either.
Councillor Whitcroft.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks for the report and the consultation. Been very pleased with that. Had quite a lot of my own residents giving feedback to me that I've made sure I forwarded on. I think this will be different in different parts of the city, at the risk of rehashing the conversation we had over parking. But in the terraced areas, particularly with older residents, I've had come and speak to me about that concern around physically moving a bin, particularly if you're someone who doesn't produce an awful lot of rubbish or refuse. Carrying in a bag used to be much easier. Moving it in a bin, if you're finding that difficult. There's a lot of discussion around supported collections, which I think we offer, which is when we actually do it for them. If we're providing a wider base of wheelie bins, which is the goal of this exercise, what consideration have we made about the extra resource we're going to need for assisted collections?
Yeah, fair point. Actually, as part of this consultation, though, everybody who receives an assisted collection now, if they receive it, the likelihood is if they receive an assisted collection on refuse, they will receive one on recycling now. So we will go into property boundaries and collect the boxes. in the current collection regime. Everybody who was on the assisted collection, who is on assisted collection scheme now, was written to as part of the consultation, just as a reassurance as anything, to say that actually, should we move to bins, nothing would change, and you would continue to receive your assisted collection. I think there's an argument against what is easy to manoeuvre. Is it boxes that might be heavy with gin bottles or other kind of glass, or is it wheeled bins that can tip easily and move? We do know there's a benefit to our crews in terms of manoeuvring bins opposed to boxes. It's something that I often hear feedback of from our crews and from residents, to be honest with you, that, you know, they often find lifting the boxes heavy, difficult, get wet, you know, etc., all the usual sort of things. But it's absolutely, I think, just to reiterate, the assisted collection scheme would remain as is and be available across all waste streams.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really good to hear, because a lot of people, I think, started to take it out, not necessarily because obviously there are a lot of people who already have these assisted collections, which I'm glad to hear will stay in place. People weren't aware assisted collections existed until the consultation came through, and we made sure that offer was there. So it's just something to think about and to make sure we've got the resource there to be able to deal with that. Similar capacity question around enforcement. I know with the rollout of the black bins that we've had in my patch, a lot of them, I get a lot of residents telling me they've been abandoned. Your team have been very good when I tell them about this and making sure that they have a sticker put on them first and then removed later if needed. It's just, I think this is something I support, but the teething problems might lead to extra resource at first. So just in terms of making sure that we have that enforcement, also prevention, making it clear people shouldn't be abandoning their bins out in the road, that sort of thing. And there's areas like mine that haven't had it before, get used to it. How are we going to sort of make sure we do that aftercare after implementation?
Yeah, again, a valid point. You know, we do ask residents to, as soon as practically possible, we appreciate people who are at work, to return the containers to the property boundary or inside the property boundary. I understand with the terraced areas and the back lanes, etc., and people might want to make best of what the space they have got in the garden and often leave them out. We do work with enforcement. We do try to educate residents and explain why, from a safety perspective as well, not just accessibility. So we continue to do that, and I appreciate there's maybe some additional resource needed when we roll that out. And I think it's a valid point that, you know, there's maybe some lessons learned from the bags to bin rollout last year and early this year.
Councillor Healy. Couple of statements, couple of questions, but the questions will be nice and simple to answer. 33, you'd like to hear our comments on A and B. I would support both A and B. Questions. On B, I'd suggest that one of the main problems we have in Bishop Hill is the material coming out of the bins. I understand that when the bins were first given out, they had like a little net on top. As part of this, you might want to allocate, so instead of allocating 2.8 million, allocate 2.8005 or something, just to get St Nick's for the people who are remaining on boxes to post through a couple of new nets for the bins. So that's point one. Point two was, as part of the cost savings, will we be ending the practice of task and finish? Is that all rolled into this? So those are the two questions, which should be nice and easy to.
So thank you for your support in A and B. In terms of the boxes, we actually provide lids. So every time we deliver boxes to residents that request them, we provide lids for them. So actually, they should be fitted on with a nice tight fit to contain the contents inside. The problem is we know that people have more recycling than what they can kind of fit in the boxes, so therefore it mounds up and the lids don't fit on then. So I don't think nets would necessarily sort that, because they end up flying off, come off, end up in the gutter, another environmental issue. But yes, anybody that would remain on boxes, we you know, obviously encourage that they use the lids, and if they do need more capacity, you know, request an additional box for whatever stream that they need to have. In terms of, I think when you're mentioning working patterns and things like that, there's a wider route optimization project that's ongoing, which would be far too detailed to go into now. That's about making efficiencies for the service. That's about making our rounds and routes as simple as possible, not just for the crews, but for the residents. So everything is under review in terms of that. We're working with project team and other officers to see what is the best model, what fits best. And we're actually talking to the front line about that right now. So it's not the same thing, but it kind of goes hand in hand in terms of the optimization of the rounds. We would really need to know, are we going to remain on boxes, or would it be recycling bins? Because it does make a difference in terms of pick rate and the makeup of numbers on the rounds.
Last thing, thank you for that. Very clear and concise. Are you going to be having different coloured bins for these? So you've got a green bin, you've got a black bin, and you're going to have, like, I don't know, an orange bin and a brown bin, so that the operatives don't have to, like, start opening bins to try and find out what's in them?
Nothing that's going to make
a sticker or something.
Nothing in terms of the full bin that's going to make your garden look like a rainbow or anything. It'd be the lids that would be different coloured, so it's easily identifiable. So one would likely be red, one would likely be blue, which would be the main body of the bin would just remain black. The lids would be one be red, one be blue.
Okay, thank you. I've got a few more that have indicated, but I'll just come in with mine now. Want to thank you for the report and the consultation. I think it's a big success that you've got a big number of responses. I do genuinely think that's worth mentioning. But I think just digging into the types of responses and who's in favour and who's not in favour, I think shapes where my view on it and my big concern, particularly representing a ward that's kind of split between houses that have got the space and houses that definitely don't have the space. And of the responses that we've got, terraced houses are against the rollout in quite a strong way from one of your annexes, for the reasons of storage, etc. Compared to a very big response from semi-detached and detached houses that are really favourable. So, I want to see it proceed, but I'm trying to understand where St Nick's can step in and where they can't step in, and where the council then has to make a decision on what's viable, because the lack of jeopardy in the consultation for residents across the city, but I'm thinking about those in my patch or in similar wards that live in terraced houses. I don't think they'll respond. They would respond if you wrote to them and said, in 6 weeks' time, you're getting this bin unless you say no, or, try and get a response that way. But the lack of jeopardy in the consultation means that people can respond saying, yes, I'd like this change. But I don't think you're hearing from the people that definitely don't want it. And so that's my concern. I'm trying to work out how the council can keep its current service for those that want its current service because of legislation changes and the capacity of St Nick's. So without repeating myself, have you got any response to that? Can St Nick's realistically step in and do the thousands of terraced houses that I don't believe want this change?
Not in the mass thousands, to answer you directly, no, Chair. So they're working on four options basically appraisal, and it's the fourth option that they're currently finishing now, and that should be with us this week. And there's obviously a cost associated to that as well in terms of the number that they can service. They have got some capacity within their current resource to expand. And then there's a tipping point for them also as to where they would have to invest in further or quite significantly. So there is a tipping point. I think us as officers have identified what we feel would be the particularly contentious properties in terms of terraces. So to give an idea of the 67,000 split might be a little bit easier. 47,000 are, or around, using round figures, 47,000 are semi-detached and detached. So that gives us around 20,000 terraced areas and properties that are in scope of this. So us as officers feel that we know where, well, just through knowledge of the service, where those properties where we want St Nick's to focus on, where we feel that their resource would be best put into. I think, I don't think it's thousands out of the 20,000 in terms of terraces that don't want this. I think through the public engagement and through the drop-in sessions, you know, through talking to people, they got it, as you've said yourself there. You know, the additional materials we're now collecting at curbside, the ones that will come in next year, in particular soft films and plastics, we know we don't really want them in boxes that are flying up and down the street because they will be difficult to contain. So I think, yeah, it was quite welcomed in some of the terraced areas, but the size of the bin was a bit of a concern, which is what we've recognised in this, and should we be looking at smaller containers for some of those areas. I mean, on the soft films and soft plastics, there's a couple of different options in terms of how they're disposed of, but we have to choose the best option in terms of the disposal process and actually how the off-takers want to take them. And that is indicating currently that would be loose and not bagged because of the technology that they've invested in. So again, that further strengthens the argument of trying to find a solution in a container that'll contain these without upsetting the environment.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the discussion around bin size, I can certainly see a compelling argument for a 180 rather than a 240 in the context of what we just discussed in terms of constrained space for terrace properties. I think with residents who would not generate a large amount of waste, there's probably less of a compelling argument, particularly if that resident then moves house, new people, big family moves in, so these bins are too small. We might get into that kind of binflation cycle of people trading bins, you know, which, you know, did happen with green bins. If people wanted to keep their 240, they found someone who didn't want their old 240, and there was a bit of bin trading going on. I mean, the consultation, the report notes that 22% of households present more than 3 boxes. So I get the point around increased capacity through the 240-litre bins. There will be households for whom a 240-litre bin collected for weekly for cardboard, for example, might not be sufficient. So there's probably a decision to be made. Do you go down the 360-litre route and again set a precedent in doing that, or as we do with boxes, do we say we'll give you another bin for your cardboard? Don't expect you to kind of decide that now, but it is a question that will be asked, and you'll need to think about how you deal with that. And I think about the interaction with the bring banks and potentially disposal of commercial waste. Will we see more of that coming through this stream? You know, disposal of commercial cardboard waste is a big issue for lots of reasons in terms of the pressure it puts on bring banks, which are meant to be there for residents to dispose of sort of big TV boxes and other things. So I think it'd be really interesting to keep an eye on the impact of these changes on some of the other ways in which people dispose of their waste, and whether we see a different pattern of usage at bring banks, and particularly in relation to commercial waste. But that's just something for you to think about, and I think it's a question people will ask in terms of, can I get another bin for my cardboard? And yeah, just to give that some thought.
I'm detecting no question again there. Yeah, no, that's fine. Good comments though. Yeah, I did that with you earlier. It is feedback. I totally agree. I was expecting someone to hop in.
I'm happy to say, I think we said as part of the executive report that we would review our waste policy anyway, our waste and recycling policy. I think it's a fair point around the bins. I don't want to stress, I don't think people maybe realise how quite big the 360 litre bins are, but if people have capacity and scope to have additional bins, obviously our regional strategy is to reduce, reuse and then recycle. So wherever we can, encourage that, we absolutely will be. Everything that's at the bring banks now, we do at the curbside, and I think we also said in the report that we would be able to offer taking at curbside, because it would actually change the scope of the fleet going forward as well. So at the minute, the paper and card is a much smaller compartment that it goes into. We would actually be able to standardise the fleet so it's one compartment, given that we're only collecting one material each week. That would give scope to collect slightly larger items. We'd prefer them within the container, but it will give us opportunity to take some small side waste or small amounts of recycling at the curbside.
Thank you. Councillor Vassie.
Thank you, Chair. So I echo a lot of the remarks that have been made about people who will struggle to move a large bin. I'm aware that you can get wheelie bins that are just 80 litres and 120 litres. And obviously you're doing calculations for the whole city. But my dad, in the last 2 years of his life, he could no longer carry the recycling boxes, but he was too embarrassed to say so. And I certainly didn't know anything about the assisted bin collections at that time. And I suspect there will be a number of people who just, this happens to them and they struggle with it and they can't actually physically pull the bin across. There'll be people like that. There'll be other people who at the end of even a month will have only filled the bottom 20% of a large bin. So I would like to think that we were able to be flexible about the options we were offering people. I understand that complicates things, but if the objective is simply to be able to whip out with a wheelie bin, stack it on a lorry and drive off, it would be good to know that consideration had been given to providing smaller wheelie bins for those kinds of people, single people in their 70s and 80s, or couples in their 80s, who really don't generate that much rubbish and will just see this as something difficult to physically move around. So that was the first point. And then there's just two other short points and then I'll shut up. One is, it's been rehearsed here, the challenges in different types of housing, whatever. Are you pushing to ensure that the planning department understands these changes so that when applications come for new homes, consideration is given to making sure there's space for bigger bins? I know in terms of commercial businesses, that is being looked at now. It would be good to know that it's happening for domestic dwellings. And my last point is, and I'm sure we all know this, but recycling isn't collecting waste. Recycling is using that waste purposefully. And it's just ironic to me that we all talk about curbside recycling. For the past 20 years, there has been an option to use plastic curbstones, to recycle plastic, to make curbstones that weigh 10 kilos instead of 70 kilos, that actually create a circular economy of plastic waste, that would mean we could hold our head up high and say we were recycling this. The stuff we were collecting is being used to create curbs along our roads that'll reduce back injuries for the people who lay curbstones, etc., etc. So I hope that in the months ahead, we may learn that that circular economy and doing something with that waste comes onto the into the thinking. Thank you.
Yeah, just to come back again on the bin size, I appreciate your points, Councillor Vassey. It looks simple enough. Doesn't matter what size container it is that goes on back of a vehicle. There are some that are compatible with most are compatible, but if you get smaller bin size, that does change sometimes the bin lift, so they're not always capable. So I think if we were able to offer different bin sizes, I think it would have to be two sizes for recycling. What I would say is though, people that don't produce a lot of recycling on that cycle, I would still encourage them to present. That would make the container lighter. The bins are quite light empty, so if they are only filling 20, 30, 40% over a 4-week cycle, absolutely still present. You're still entitled to the same amount of collections each time. But it's a fair point, and you know, we want to help our most vulnerable in the city, and the assisted collections will remain as they are. In terms of planning, it's a really good point. We do work with planning department now on new developments to ensure that road widths, for instance, are the right size. So it's a really valid point that we do that in terms of storage space as well. I think just touching on the circular economy, it's something that we're wanting to work on. We are in a period, or we're building up to a time where we're having to review our regional strategy alongside North Yorkshire colleagues as well, that we share disposal arrangements with. So there's much discussion going on in the background at the minute around circular economy and what we can do to improve that. I would have to ask Highways colleagues though on the plastic curves and the viability of using them, but I'm sure they might want to feedback at some point.
I'm sure we'll. I mean, we have been having discussions about circular economy recently, and how we dovetail that with the new waste strategy, but recycling and the materials that are produced from recycling it's critical that we sort of push them up and reuse, repurpose, etc. Whether that's enabling residents to do that before they go in the container, or whether it's once we get it in the container. So there's nothing that's off the table in terms of materials. The only thing it would be to create that local supply chain that's able to produce that material, or local enough that it makes financial sense for it to use in the city. I'm sure if we work hard enough, that's possible. Yeah.
If I can just respond, Chair, I'm more than happy to send you links to other local authorities that use plastic curbstones and motorways where they're used as well, and so forth.
Sounds good. Okay, Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for responses so far. I won't go back over the points that have been made. I think just particularly my concerns around terrace streets, and given the fact that from the reporting, Guildhall was had received the lowest responses and probably has got quite a high number of terrace streets. So my sort of concern is managing this process of this change is going to be kind of challenging in my ward, although it is reassuring to hear that some of the lessons learned from the bags to bins changeover will inform the process. But I suppose my real question is just going back a little bit to St Nick's and rolling that out to maybe more of the city centre. Just considering, I don't know whether parts of Guildhall I have in mind, such as the Groves and Lawrence Street, have been considered in that, but my sort of concern also there is that there are quite high numbers of HMOs and houses with quite a number of occupants that generate quite a lot of waste and recycling, and I'm sure there are processes already in place for dealing with that waste in the areas that St Nick's already cover, but I'm just wondering what consideration that's been given also to the sort of like the discussions with St Nick's, I suppose, and how that might work. Thanks.
It's probably one I would have to take away in terms of HMOs and how that might be impacted. And then again, what St Nick's can do. I think from an HMO perspective, it would be the council that we'd want to be collecting those for sure. But it is important that they have the right capacity for the recycling and waste that they produce, if I'm understanding correctly.
So I suppose my question was, and I probably need to be clear about that, is that how whether St Nick's would take on those HMOs or whether that would still fall to the council, and how that would work, whether that would pose a difficulty.
That they'll fall to the council. Are highly likely to for us to for our service to continue for the HMOs.
Okay, I'm gonna have a second bite of it, and then I guess we'll try and nod this one along. I would say bins aren't beautiful. I mean, I'm really concerned about this because of the street residential amenity and the street scene, which other people have said in the consultation responses. So I am concerned about a two-tier service based on the response from St Nick's that you might get that says we're only able to go to this many at this stage. And so how do you pick which terraced streets they go for when a similar terraced street in another part of the city in exactly the same circumstances then won't get that service and could end up just getting rolled out bins that they've really got nowhere to put apart from their alleys or their forecourts, which leads me to that other point about planning and our policy on HMOs. There is one of our policies when considering HMOs is the street scene and the bin placements for more bins being added to the street scene. So we already in one part of the council feel that residential amenity does suffer by adding bins to the street scene. And I'd want to press that point really, because adding 2 bins to every property on a terraced street, I think does have a big impact, and one I think is quite negative compared to what we have at present. So I'd really want to hammer home that point really. You've got 80% of people responding saying, that, 80% from semi and detached houses, which means less than 20 from terrace streets. And it says that it's predominantly negative from terraces with no front storage, and mostly negative to mix with terraces with forecourts. So I do think it's a big issue, as mentioned when I went off on one earlier, and I think I really did want to press that point home. Sorry about that, committee, but that's my views. The recommendations are that we consider the feedback, provide feedback to officers to help inform this consideration, and we consider the incoming legislation changes, which we have done through Ian, to ensure that York meets the simpler recycling reforms. Has anybody else got any further points to make? And would anybody at the top table like to just give us any summary? But there's no, you don't have to. We have been through it.
I wasn't particularly going to summarise because I think that was quite clear, but I'm happy to do that again if you wish. I did want to thank officers for this, and particularly the team who I think they went to great efforts to get out in the community and provide drop-in consultation sessions when they were quite light in terms of staff anyway. So that was a good effort, and I was lucky enough to be at a couple of those, and it was really, I do want to thank the residents who came, because they had those, unsurprisingly, who attended did have very strong opinions, but they were indicative of subsections of the population, and they made all the points that have been very well summarised. But I just thank everyone for their comments. I think that the difficulty with York is the different aspects of housing, but I am likewise concerned as you are, Chair, for our terraces, of which my ward is one, which have less space, and the visual impact will be much more significant, and also the impact on their own amenity if they have very small backyards. So that is something I do want us to be able to, cater with sensitively.
I really appreciate that. I think we're done. Okay, thank you so much for that. Really appreciate it. So we'll take another break. No. Just tickling you there. Right, okay. Last item is item 7, and it is our work plan. You know, I think what I should say before we just go for this, is that this meeting today was a meeting that filled a gap because we had requests from officers. There wasn't a gap. They asked for an extra meeting. So you'll see from our work plan that it doesn't look much different to last month's work plan, but I can assure you that work is underway to get it filled up, and that work is gathering pace. James, do you want me to bring you in at this point?
Thanks, yeah, I can jump in briefly, if that's okay. Yeah, so just to sort of draw members' attention, so you've got the item on water quality coming next time. We're still sort of following up some inquiries around the Make It York and bid item around the sort of city centre economy for that one as well. And then just in the process of getting together an informal work planning session for the chair and the vice chair to meet with directors and executive members. So there'll be some more information on that coming shortly. But I think that's probably it for where we are at the moment with it. But as you say, Chair, more to follow quite soon.
Thank you, James. So all that said, are people happy to just continue with this? It's the same as last month. The draft schedule is as it is, and then we've got the potential and unallocated topics listed below. And as James mentioned, we've got a meeting with officers to discuss those items in more detail, myself and the vice chair, and we will populate that list. Happy? Okay. Ecstatic, I hear. Wonderful. Right, okay, we're going to move to the final item, which is any urgent business from the committee. No, well, thank you everyone for your participation, and I will see you at the next one. Okay.